Picture this: Phoenix, Arizona, August 2027. It's 112 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and the grid operator declares an emergency. Your phone buzzes with a notification from the city utility. Peak event active. Energy token required for priority power. You don't panic because your bank account is fine. You have money, savings, credit cards, access to cash. Then you open the utility app and see a new line you've never seen before. Energy token balance, 14.6. Your cash can still buy food, fuel, and medicine, but it can't guarantee electricity. Your air conditioning stays on only if your home remains in the priority tier. Your neighbor's house drops to rotating outages because they didn't enroll in the new token program. They aren't poor. They aren't delinquent. They're simply outside the system. This is where the narrative breaks. Local energy crypto isn't an investment product. It's a gate. A permission layer between you and infrastructure you can't live without. Once a permission layer exists, it can be tightened without warning. I'm not anti-technology. I'm pro-evidence. Utilities already have smart meters that measure consumption minute by minute. Cities already use dynamic pricing that changes hourly. Emergency powers already override contracts during grid stress. Add a token and you don't create freedom. You create a programmable switch. When officials face shortages, they need levers. When budgets collapse, they need enforcement tools. When politics get unstable, they need compliance mechanisms. Energy is the perfect choke point because nobody can opt out. You can't boycott electricity in August. The real question isn't whether cities will experiment with energy tokens. The real question is what happens to your financial freedom when money no longer guarantees access. Let's break the system down to its core dependencies, because this is where people get fooled. When your electricity access depends on an energy token, you're no longer holding money. You're holding permission. Permission depends on layers that fail in reverse order. First comes policy. A city council vote, an unelected utility board, or an emergency declaration can redefine how the token works overnight. Second comes identity. Government-linked wallets are never anonymous. Your usage is logged, profiled, and scored. Third comes the platform. Tokens live inside apps, portals, exchanges, and vendor systems that can freeze, flag, or suspend accounts instantly. Fourth comes acceptance. Your token only works if the utility honors it, if the platform is online, and if the rules haven't changed since yesterday. Fifth comes the grid itself. When infrastructure is stressed, the system that gives the token value is the first thing under pressure. This is the paradox nobody markets. Energy crypto doesn't reduce fragility. It concentrates it. Today, it's sold as rewards. Conserve energy and earn credits. Tomorrow, it becomes penalties. Exceed your baseline and lose access. Today, it's framed as sustainability. Tomorrow, it's carbon compliance. Today, it's efficiency. Tomorrow, it's rationing. And because it's programmable, enforcement is automatic. No hearings, no appeals, no negotiations. Just a system executing rules you didn't vote on, but are forced to live under. Electricity stops being a service you pay for and becomes a behavior you must perform correctly. When behavior becomes the currency, financial freedom no longer depends on how much money you have. It depends on whether the system allows you to spend it at all. Here's the part most people miss because it doesn't feel dramatic until it's already normal. Local governments don't need to confiscate money to control outcomes. They just need to change what money can access. We've already watched this play out in smaller systems. Water restrictions during droughts didn't care how much you were willing to pay. Lawn irrigation was banned outright. Fuel rationing during emergencies didn't reward wealth. It rewarded compliance with rules. Energy tokens follow the same logic but automate it. Once electricity access is tokenized, price becomes secondary. Priority becomes primary. Hospitals, Government buildings, data centers, and compliant households stay online. Everyone else rotates into darkness, and the criteria for priority are not static. Today, it's critical need. Tomorrow, it's carbon score. Next year, it's enrollment in approved programs. The dangerous shift isn't technological, it's legal. Utilities already operate under public interest exemptions. During emergencies, they can override contracts, suspend market pricing, and impose allocation rules. Courts consistently defer to these powers because electricity is considered essential infrastructure. That means once a token system exists, it can be repurposed instantly under emergency justification. You don't need legislation. You need a shortage, and shortages are no longer rare events. Heat waves, grid aging, fuel supply disruptions, and policy-driven capacity reductions make stress the default condition. When stress becomes permanent, emergency rules become permanent too. At that point, your energy token isn't a convenience. It's a compliance meter that determines whether your household stays functional. Financial freedom assumes voluntary exchange. Tokens replace voluntary exchange with conditional access. Now let's address the argument supporters always raise. This won't happen here. That phrase has an expiration date. The same logic was used before bank withdrawal limits, before capital controls, before currency pegs broke, before energy price caps became mandatory. Systems don't fail by announcing themselves. They evolve quietly until reversal becomes impossible. Local energy crypto systems start small by design. Pilot programs, opt-in incentives, bonus credits for conservation, discounts during off-peak hours. Nobody resists because nobody feels threatened. Then the rules change during the first real crisis. Enrollment becomes default. Opt-out becomes penalized. Credits become requirements. Baselines become ceilings. At that point, leaving the system means accepting reduced access to heat, cooling, refrigeration, communication, and medical devices. This is why energy is different from money. You can hold cash outside banks. You can diversify assets. You can store food. You cannot store grid electricity at scale without enormous infrastructure. Dependence is absolute. That's what makes energy tokens uniquely powerful. They don't need enforcement squads. They don't need police. They don't need force. The system enforces itself because survival requires participation. And once participation is mandatory, financial freedom becomes theoretical. You may still earn money, you may still own assets, but access to daily life depends on rules you don't control. That's not a conspiracy. It's a structural outcome of tying programmable systems to essential infrastructure. History already ran this experiment, just without blockchain branding. During wartime rationing, governments didn't seize wealth. They restricted access. Ration books determined who could buy fuel, food, and materials regardless of income. Black markets emerged immediately because price signals were overridden by permissions. Energy tokens modernize that model with automation and data. Instead of paper coupons, you get real-time behavioral scoring. Instead of inspectors, you get algorithms. Instead of visible enforcement, you get silent throttling. The lesson from every rationing system is the same. Once access is decoupled from money, money loses its power. That doesn't make society fairer. It makes it brittle. Those with insider status adapt. Everyone else absorbs the shock. And unlike historical rationing, digital systems don't expire when crises end. They persist because they're efficient. Utilities don't remove control mechanisms that work. They refine them, add climate mandates, fiscal stress, and aging infrastructure, and you get a permanent justification for allocation. This is why energy crypto appeals to governments. It solves three problems at once: demand management, revenue stability, behavioral compliance. The public hears innovation. The system here's leverage, and leverage always expands. No city introduces a control tool planning to never use it. The real risk isn't malicious intent. It's normal institutional behavior under pressure. When faced with shortages, authorities choose systems that reduce political cost. Automated restriction does exactly that. No debates, no negotiations, just outcomes. So what actually protects financial freedom when access becomes programmable? Not speculation, not ideology, redundancy, independence from single points of control. Systems that function when permissions fail. Cash still works because it requires no approval. Local energy generation works because it bypasses allocation layers. Storage matters because it turns intermittent access into buffered access. The people least affected by rationing are never the richest. They're the least dependent. This isn't about rejecting technology. It's about understanding dependency chains. Every layer you don't control is a vulnerability. Energy tokens add layers, not remove them. They increase efficiency at the cost of autonomy. That trade-off is invisible until it's irreversible. The uncomfortable truth is this: financial freedom doesn't end when accounts are frozen. It ends when money can't buy essentials. At that point, wealth becomes abstract and access becomes real. You don't prepare for that by chasing returns. You prepare by asking a harder question. What still works when rules change overnight? What still functions when apps go dark? What still powers life when permissions are revoked? If your answer depends on enrollment, compliance, or approval, it isn't freedom. This is where local governments enter the story directly, because cities don't think in ideology. They think in constraints. Municipal budgets are collapsing under pension liabilities, infrastructure decay, and rising energy costs. Utilities face an impossible equation. Demand keeps rising. Generation becomes more regulated. Political tolerance for blackouts is zero. Something has to give. Energy tokens offer a solution that looks neutral but shifts power quietly. Instead of raising rates universally and triggering backlash, cities can segment access. Instead of saying electricity is more expensive, they say electricity is optimized. Instead of saying you're being restricted, they say you're being incentivized. Carbon policy accelerates this logic. Emissions targets require enforcement mechanisms. Pricing carbon through markets is politically fragile. Tokenizing energy usage makes enforcement automatic. Exceed your allowance and your cost spikes. Miscompliance benchmarks and your priority drops. This isn't speculation. Pilot programs already link energy usage to digital credits, rebates, and penalties. Once carbon accounting is granular, restriction becomes granular too. Neighborhood by neighborhood. Household by household. Appliance by appliance. And because it's local, resistance fragments. One city adopts it. Another copies it. A third integrates it with state mandates. By the time people notice the pattern, opting out means relocating, rewiring, rebuilding, or living with permanent disadvantage. That's how systems lock in. Not through force, through normalization. The most dangerous assumption is that democratic oversight prevents abuse. In reality, most of these systems are delegated to utility boards, regulatory agencies, and emergency authorities that operate outside direct voter control. Decisions happen in technical language, buried in compliance frameworks and pilot extensions. By the time outcomes hit households, the rules are already in place. And once energy access becomes conditional, reversing it becomes politically impossible. No official wants to campaign on reducing grid control during shortages. No regulator wants to remove a tool that prevents outages. No city wants to be the one that turns the lights off. So the system ratchets one direction: more monitoring, more conditions, more automation, less discretion, less negotiation, less exit. This is the same pattern you saw with financial surveillance, airport security, and digital identification. Temporary measures became permanent infrastructure. Energy tokens follow the same trajectory, but with higher stakes because electricity underpins everything else: communication, healthcare, food storage, work, safety. When access to energy becomes a behavioral output, freedom becomes conditional by default. Here's the final autopsy, and it's simpler than the narrative built around it. Local governments don't need to take your money to disrupt your financial freedom. They just need to decide what your money can no longer access. Energy crypto doesn't fail because it's digital. It fails because it concentrates permission at the exact layer that collapses first under stress. Policy changes before markets react. Platforms freeze before people adapt. Infrastructure fails before ideology matters. When electricity becomes conditional, freedom becomes fragile. This isn't a warning about some distant future. The components already exist: smart meters, dynamic pricing, emergency powers, digital wallets, carbon targets. All that's missing is integration, and integration always arrives faster than people expect because it's efficient. If you take one thing from this analysis, let it be this: financial freedom is not measured by how advanced the system is. It's measured by how many layers can fail before your life stops working. If energy access depends on enrollment, scoring, and approval, you're not participating in a market. You're participating in a managed system. That doesn't make you powerless, but it does demand clarity. Understand what you depend on. Understand what can be shut off. Understand what still functions when permissions disappear. If this breakdown helped you see a risk the headlines don't explain, hit subscribe. I break down financial and infrastructure narratives the moment marketing replaces evidence. Drop a comment and tell me what system you want dissected next. Because the most dangerous disruptions aren't sudden, they're normalized.